Crisis Core is known for its sad ending, where Zack makes his heroic last stand against Shinra. But as sad as it was, one thing always bugged me. Has anyone ever wondered why the Turks could not find Zack? At first the answer is simple, that the Turks had no idea where Zack and Cloud were. The infantry found them first, while the Turks seemingly looked elsewhere. But the more I think about this, the more I believe that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes, something that makes this ending even more tragic. From my view, it is heavily implied that Heidegger and likely President Shinra kept the Turks completely in the dark about what was going on, so the Turks never had a chance of saving Zack and Cloud. Here's my reasoning. Number 1, the Turks are very skillful at finding difficult persons or items of interest. Throughout Crisis Core and other games, the Turks constantly search and find whoever they need to. Aerith, the Keystone, the Temple of the Ancients, etc. They rarely have issues doing any of this actually, which goes into my second point. The Turks already found and tracked Zack and Cloud after Nibelheim. They were needles in a haystack, yet Cissnei easily found them twice after they escaped, while the rest of Shinra apparently could not.
Behind you. So predictable.
Moving on to my next point, Shinra knew Zack and the Turks were close and had some sort of relationship. They went on missions together and were comrades, so Shinra likely assumed they were friends. Furthermore, Shinra likely knew Cissnei had been in both locations as Zack around the same time, but Zack was still not captured. Shinra might assume Cissnei or the Turks were helping him. My next point is that Shinra knew where Zack had been since they retrieved Genesis after the final battle, so it would make sense that they could track and predict which route Zack was going and where he was potentially headed. This would explain the massive trap set by an army of infantrymen and helicopters ready to fight Zack. They knew exactly where Zack was going to be, and if they knew this, then the Turks did not. Otherwise, the Turks would have joined in. Think about it. The way this scene is constructed definitely doesn't make it seem like the small army randomly came across Zack. They had information. On to my next point, Zack's last stand lasted from day to night with large explosions, and many troops were called in for backup. The Turks never saw the fight nor heard anything over the radio during this time, even though they communicate with infantrymen in many instances both in Crisis Core and in other games, such as in Final Fantasy VII when the plate is falling. I'd also like to bring up that Turks are used for dangerous and difficult missions, and were previously being used to find Zack and Cloud. It would make sense to call them in for this fight once it began. For an important mission such as this, not calling the Turks in for backup makes no sense unless something else was going on. The only reason they would not be called in is if President Shinra made the decision not to. Heidegger and the Turks operate separately under the President, so it makes sense that the President would be involved in the decision not to call the Turks here. Additionally, you can assume the President was involved in not calling the Turks because of Final Fantasy VII Remake. We already know from Remake that the President is involved in many things, such as knowing when Cloud and the others beat the Crab Warden, calling Heidegger immediately, or watching Avalanche infiltrate the first reactor. Now on to my last point. This theory as a whole is given more credibility because of Before Crisis, where the Turks commonly disobeyed orders from Shinra. By then, Shinra knew the Turks were not to be trusted and even got to the point where the Turks were almost executed because of their disobedience. Essentially, Shinra not trusting the Turks at the end of Crisis Core makes sense because that happens in Before Crisis. In fact, Shinra already withheld information from the Turks on who the fugitives actually were from Nibelheim.
The fugitive sample. Is it you?
If Shinra believed the Turks were going to try to save Zack, there's no way they would have told the Turks any valuable information. My theory may not be perfect, but it helps clear up these loose ends that the ending doesn't directly answer. How can regular infantry soldiers know where Zack is, but not the Turks, whose job it is to know? Heidegger and his men were the only ones ambushing Zack. It seems clear that Heidegger convinced the President to allow the infantry to take care of the mission. Killing Zack is of the utmost importance to Shinra, so why would the President not send absolutely everyone available? Well, he normally would. Yes, Heidegger and his infantrymen wanted to prove they were better than Soldier, but with how high they knew the body count was going to be, that would not be good enough reasoning for the President. Since in this instance the President never called the Turks, it makes too much sense that the President was likely informed by Heidegger that the Turks were helping Zack. This would convince the President not to call the Turks and rely solely on the infantry. This then explains why the Turks had no idea where Zack was. They no longer had access to information they normally would. would. In fact, they were so far off that they never saw or heard the huge amount of fighting going on right outside Midgar. Thus, I believe the Turks were kept in the dark on purpose, making it almost impossible to locate Zack and Cloud before Shinra did. It is sad enough as it is that the Turks did not find Zack in time, but that they were intentionally kept in the dark makes everything that much more tragic. The Turks knew they were Zack's only hope of surviving, and likely had hope of finding him first. In reality, they never had a chance, making this story even more tragic than it already was. I hope everyone enjoyed watching this, and I'll see you all in the next video.